The shuttle door hissed open, and the air outside felt heavy and wet and full of strange smells that burned the lungs and made every breath feel like swallowing hot steam and dust. Eli Hunter stepped out first with a rope over his shoulder and a machete in his hand, while behind him the rest of the team checked their weapons and scanned the thick green mist that hid everything beyond a few steps ahead. The jungle of Korra 9 waited in silence for only a moment before the noises began again, with low growls from somewhere deep inside, and the clicks of insects so loud they sounded like snapping bones, and the high screams of creatures that could be far away or right above their heads. 3 aliens followed Eli 1, with scales the color of rust, 1 with 4 small black eyes, and 1 tall and thin with skin that shimmered like water, and the last member of the crew was a robot shaped like a human, but with a chest full of blinking sensors. They had been sent to find the silver fruit that could feed a whole colony for months, but the locals had given the jungle a name that no one forgot once they heard it, Deathworld, and they said that nothing that went in ever came back. The ground was soft and spongy under their boots, and every step released a smell like rot and metal, and the mist curled around their legs like it was alive and watching them. Eli walked ahead without looking back, and the others whispered about how strange he was, how calm he seemed in a place that had killed so many before them, and how he carried no blaster, only a rope and a blade like something from an old story. They passed a tree with bark that pulsed slowly like a heartbeat, and the rust-colored alien reached out a claw to touch it, but Eli snapped a word over his shoulder telling him not to, and then the bark split open to reveal rows of small sharp teeth, clicking in the air where the claw had been a second ago. The team moved on quickly, their eyes shifting left and right as if the shadows between the leaves could jump out at any moment. The robot reported heat signatures all around them, moving slowly through the canopy and on the ground and even under the soil, but it could not identify any of them because the shapes kept changing, as if the jungle itself shifted to hide what lived inside. The thin alien muttered that they should go back before the mist closed in completely, but Eli kept moving with steady steps, cutting vines and pushing aside plants that smelled like burning plastic. Above them something moved with a sound like leather sliding across wood, and the robot tilted its head to track it, but the canopy was too thick to see more than a flicker of motion. The air grew hotter and heavier until even the aliens were sweating, and the rust-colored one said in a low voice that the jungle wanted them to tire and slow down because tired prey was easier to take, and no one laughed at the thought because it felt true. Eli stopped suddenly and raised his hand for silence, and the whole group froze, listening to the faint creak of a branch and the slow, deep sound of breathing somewhere close but hidden. They waited with weapons ready, and the robot sensors pinged with the strong signal just above them in the trees. Eli's eyes flicked up, and he caught a glimpse of something that glowed faintly in the mist, 2 eyes, bright yellow and unblinking, staring straight down at them without fear. A cold shiver went through the crew, and the water-skinned alien whispered that predators here like to follow before they struck, so that their prey would feel the fear grow and grow until it was too much to think clearly. The eyes vanished into the shadows, and the branch above swayed, as if something heavy had moved away. Eli started walking again, but faster now, and the others kept close, the mist around them curling tighter, like fingers closing into a fist. The jungle sounds faded into an eerie quiet, except for the distant rush of water and the occasional crack of branches somewhere far off, or maybe not so far at all. The rust-colored alien asked the robot how far to the location marked on the map, and the robot answered that at their current pace, it would take 3 hours if nothing slowed them down. Eli gave a short laugh that had no humor in it, and said that something always slowed you down in the Deathworld jungle, and that they should be ready for it when it came. They crossed a patch of ground covered in small red flowers that turned to follow them as they walked, and when the thin alien stepped too close, one of the flowers snapped shut with a sound like breaking glass. The group's nerves were tight as wire, and even Eli kept scanning the trees now with a focus that made the others uneasy, because if the human looked worried, then they knew the danger was real. The sound came again, the deep breath above and behind them, and then the sharp crack of wood breaking, followed by a roar that seemed to shake the leaves from the branches and make the ground tremble beneath their feet. Eli turned slowly, machete in hand, as the mist parted just enough for a dark shape to drop from the canopy, and land with a crash only a few steps away, the glow of its eyes burning through the green haze as the roar came again, louder and closer and full of hunger. The thing landed with a sound like bones cracking under stone, and the force of its weight shook the soft jungle ground as leaves and shards of bark rained down on the crew, who stood frozen, with the roar still echoing inside their skulls. It was larger than any predator they had imagined, with muscles shifting under black striped fur and claws that sank deep into the earth as it crouched low, ready to spring forward. The yellow eyes burned like fire in the mist, and the smell that rolled off it was sharp and metallic, like blood that had been left in the heat too long. No one moved until the predator gave a slow step forward, and the rust-colored alien fired first his blaster beam, slicing through the mist and hitting a tree trunk where the beast had been a second before. The speed was shocking. It was on the move before their minds could process, and then it leapt not at the armed alien, but at the smallest member of the water-skinned one, who screamed once before the huge jaws closed around him, and both vanished into the green haze above. Blood rained down in hot drops, staining the leaves and soaking the ground where the crew stood, and the sound of chewing came from somewhere above, hidden by thick leaves that swayed slowly with the movement of something feeding. The robot raised its sensors toward the sound and gave a warning pulse that the large heat signature was moving away deeper into the canopy, but another was already closing in from behind. Eli grabbed the arm of the rust-colored alien and hissed for him to move fast now, before they all ended the same way, but the alien hesitated, looking into the mist, as if waiting for the lost crew member to drop back down alive, even though they all knew it would not happen. They ran through choking vines and over roots that grabbed at their boots, and the jungle seemed to come alive as they passed giant flowers that spat a spray of acid, so hot it burned holes in the leaves before their eyes. The robot stumbled as its leg servos sparked from a brush with the acid spray, and Eli hauled it up, without slowing his pace, dragging it forward with one hand while hacking through a wall of creepers with a machete. The air was thick and heavy, and every breath felt like swallowing smoke, but they kept moving until the sounds of the predator behind them faded into the distance, replaced by the low hum of insects and the strange hollow knock of something unseen tapping wood in the dark. The rust-colored alien muttered that they were being herded like livestock toward something else, something worse, and Eli only gave a small nod, as if he agreed, but did not want to say it out loud. The mist thinned for a moment, and they entered a clearing where the ground was covered in a carpet of small silver leaves that shivered even though no wind touched them. Eli slowed his pace and scanned the ground with sharp eyes before stepping only on the bare patches between the leaves and telling the others to do the same. But the rust-colored alien was too slow and brushed a boot across the silver plants. The ground gave way under him with a sickening sound, and suddenly he was sliding down into a black pit lined with teeth that clicked and ground together like grinding stones. Eli dropped the machete and threw the rope from his shoulder, catching the alien's arm before he went under, while the robot fired its arm blaster into the pit, making the teeth recoil and shriek in a sound that felt like it stabbed straight into the brain. With a final heave, Eli pulled the alien up, and both fell back onto the soft ground, breathing hard as the silver leaves settled back into stillness, as if nothing had happened. They did not speak for a while, but the rust-colored alien looked at Eli with a new expression, one that was not just fear of the jungle, but a kind of wary respect mixed with confusion at how the humans seemed to know these traps, as if he had walked here before. The robot scanned ahead again and reported a massive heat signature moving parallel to their path, keeping pace at about 40 steps distance. Eli told them to keep moving, but not too fast, because running would make them seem weak, and predators in Deathworld jungle always chased weakness. They passed under a tree with bark like glass that reflected their faces back at them, only the reflections did not match their movements, and Eli told them not to look too long, because the tree fed on the attention of living things until they froze in place forever. The alien hurried away without another word, and the robot beeped a warning that the heat signature had closed the distance to 20 steps. Eli's grip tightened on the machete, and he guided them toward higher ground where the soil was drier and the vines less thick, but as they climbed the slope, a new sound filled the air, low and heavy like deep breathing all around them. The mist here was darker, almost black, and the air smelled of wet fur and rot, and the rust-colored alien whispered that they were in a hunting zone. They reached the top of the slope and saw the shape waiting for them, just beyond the tree-line. Not the predator from before, but something even larger. Its back hunched and covered in plates like stone, and its jaw split into 3 sections lined with hooks of bone. The robot fired first, and the beam burned a black streak across its chest, but the thing only roared louder and took a step forward. Eli shouted for them to move sideways, and they darted into the thicker undergrowth, while the beast crashed after them, tearing up trees like they were grass. The chase drove them toward the sound of running water, and they burst out onto the edge of a wide river where black shapes moved under the surface in lazy circles. The alien swore in his own language because they were trapped between the river and the charging beast, but Eli grabbed a thick vine hanging from an ancient tree and swung out over the water, landing on a half-submerged rock. He called for the others to follow, and the alien came next, barely making the jump, while the robot used its boosters to cross, but the beast stopped at the edge and let out a roar that made the water ripple. Eli scanned the other side and saw another path leading deeper into the jungle, and he signaled them forward. But before they moved, the water below them began to churn as dozens of long snouts broke the surface, each lined with rows of teeth. The alien froze as one of the snouts snapped inches from his leg, and Eli yanked him forward, leaping to the far bank, just as the beasts in the water thrashed and snapped behind them. They ran again without looking back, moving deeper into the mist that now felt heavier than before, as if it carried the weight of the eyes that followed them unseen from every direction. The robot gave another warning tone and reported that the large heat signature from earlier had reappeared ahead of them, this time not moving away, but staying in one place like it was waiting. Eli slowed his steps, and the rust-colored alien looked at him with wide eyes, asking what kind of predator waits for prey instead of chasing it. Eli only said that the worst kind does that, and then he gripped his machete tighter, because he knew what they were about to see would make the first creature look almost harmless. The mist parted slightly, and there it was, crouched, low, muscles rippling under striped fur, and eyes locked on them. But this time it did not roar, it only watched, and the stillness of it was more terrifying than the sound of attack, because stillness meant choice, and they were not sure if it had decided yet. The alien raised his blaster slowly, but Eli pushed it down, telling him no, not yet, because sometimes in Deathworld jungle, firing first only made sure you never fired again. They took one more step forward, and the predator's tail twitched once, then twice, and the ground around them seemed to hold its breath. The striped predator's tail moved slowly back and forth, and the mist between them carried the smell of wet fur and old blood, while the crew stood frozen with the sound of their own breathing loud in their ears. Eli stepped forward one pace, keeping his machete low but ready, and the predator's eyes followed every movement without blinking, as if weighing the value of the prey before it. The rust-colored alien gripped his blaster so tight his claws scraped the metal, and the robot's sensors beeped in a steady rhythm that somehow made the silence worse. Then, without warning, the predator turned and leapt into the mist, vanishing between the trees, so fast it seemed to melt into them, leaving behind only the faint sound of heavy paws landing far away. The alien exhaled in a long, shaky breath and said it was gone, but Eli shook his head and said it had simply decided to wait for another time, because nothing in Deathworld jungle gave up so easily. They moved on through twisting vines and low-hanging branches that dripped with thick sap like dark honey, and every drop that touched the ground hissed and smoked. The slope beneath their feet grew steeper and the mist thicker until it clung to their skin and clothes, and even the robot's sensors began to glitch. The ground here was strange, a patchwork of soft soil and harder ridges, as if something large had moved beneath it long ago, carving hidden tunnels. Eli kept scanning the trees, and the alien kept his blaster aimed at the shadows, but the danger came from below, without a sound, as the soil beneath their feet gave way all at once. The three of them dropped down together, sliding along a wall of damp roots into darkness, and then they were falling into the wide-open mouth of something alive. Rows of teeth like curved spears ringed the pit, each tooth as long as a forearm and dripping with a pale slime that smoked where it touched their boots. Eli grabbed a thick root and caught the robot's arm, pulling hard, while the rust-colored alien grabbed another root, but his claw slipped on the wet bark. The root he clung to began to tighten around him like a snake, and Eli realized it was not a root at all, but part of the same creature whose mouth they were trapped in. He swung his machete in a quick, sharp arc, severing the living tendril and hauling the alien upward, just as more of the teeth began to close in from every side. The pit gave a deep shuddering groan as if angry at losing its meal, and the three of them scrambled out onto the edge, falling into the leaf litter, with their chests heaving, and their hands slick with sap and blood. The alien stared at Eli with wide eyes, and asked how he had known where to cut, and Eli only said that in Deathworld jungle anything that moved, when you touched it, was never truly part of the ground. They staggered forward with the sound of the pit sealing itself behind them, and the air seemed to grow warmer as the jungle closed in tighter from all sides. High above them the leaves whispered with the movement of something following, and the alien muttered that the striped predator had returned, but Eli did not answer because his focus was fixed on the faint vibration under his feet. They came to a clearing where the ground was cracked and dry in places, but wet and soft in others, and from the center of it rose a massive plant shaped like an open flower, its petals deep red, and lined with fine hair-like threads that swayed gently in the air. The alien stared at it with uneasy fascination, and the robot identified it as a carnivorous trap plant capable of digesting prey the size of a small vehicle. Eli told them to skirt around it, but the moment they stepped onto the far side, the petals snapped shut with a force that made the ground tremble, trapping something unseen inside. From within came a muffled scream, and the alien froze, realizing that someone else had been in the clearing before them and had not made it out. They moved faster after that, pushing through the undergrowth until the trees thinned, and they found themselves at the edge of a wide ravine. Far below ran a slow, dark river that glistened in the dim light, and shapes moved lazily beneath the surface, casting long shadows. Eli scanned the banks for a crossing, but the only way forward was a fallen tree stretched across the gap, its bark slick with moss, and its surface crawling with small white insects that hissed and scattered as the wind touched them. The alien said there had to be another way, but Eli started across, without looking back, moving in slow, steady steps that did not shake the log. Halfway across, the insects began to swarm toward him, from both ends, their tiny jaws snapping, and their hissing growing louder like boiling water. Eli swung his machete in wide arcs, clearing a path, and the alien followed close behind, kicking at the insects, while the robot brought up the rear, firing short bursts from its arm blaster to keep the swarms back. They made it to the far side just as the insects covered the log, completely turning it into a writhing white carpet that vanished into the mist behind them. On the other side, the jungle floor was littered with bones, some old and dry, others fresh with strips of flesh still clinging to them. The alien bent to pick up a piece of metal half buried in the dirt and recognized it as part of a helmet from another crew that had vanished here months ago. Before they could speak, a deep sound rolled through the trees, like distant thunder, but steadier and heavier, and Eli's eyes narrowed, because he knew it was the sound of something large moving deliberately toward them. The robot scanned and reported a massive life form closing in at a speed too fast for its size, and Eli pointed toward a line of thicker trees, saying they needed cover now. They slipped into the shadows, just as the creature broke into the clearing, a hulking form covered in black plates, with a head low to the ground and claws that tore the soil apart as it walked. It sniffed the air, turning slowly, as if searching for the scent it already knew was there, and the alien held his breath, while Eli remained perfectly still, his hand resting lightly on the machete handle. The creature paused, then moved on toward the ravine, and with each heavy step the ground shook until it was gone into the mist. The alien let out a shaky breath and asked what it was, and Eli said it was one of the jungle's teeth, the kind that swallowed whole stretches of ground when it fed, and that if they saw it again, it would not pass them by so easily. They pressed deeper into the trees until the light faded and the mist thickened to the point where it felt like walking through water, and the sounds around them changed from distant cries to close whispers and soft scraping. Somewhere behind them, the striped predator gave a low growl that seemed to answer the whispers, and Eli realized they were now caught between two hunters, neither of which would give up. The alien looked at him as if expecting a plan, and Eli gave a tight smile without humor and said the plan was simple: keep moving, keep breathing, and never stop watching the shadows. The robot beeped a warning of multiple heat signatures ahead, and Eli raised his hand for silence as they stepped into another clearing, where the air smelled faintly of meat and blood, and in the center lay something massive, curled in the grass, muscles rippling under striped fur, and eyes slowly opening to meet theirs. The striped predator rose slowly from the grass, its shoulders rolling with a lazy grace that was somehow more frightening than a sudden attack, and its golden eyes fixed on Eli in a way that felt almost like recognition rather than simple hunger. The rust-colored alien tightened his grip on the blaster, but Eli moved one hand back in a sharp motion telling him, without words, not to fire, and the robot tilted its head, as if trying to calculate the strange risk in that choice. The predator took a single step forward, its tail swaying from side to side, and the ground beneath seemed to hold its breath, the usual insect noise of the jungle fading to silence, as though even the smallest creatures were watching what would happen. Eli stepped forward, as well, his machete still in hand but lowered, and his other hand opening slowly, palm up, as he began to speak in a low, steady rhythm, not in standard trade speech, but in a rolling, almost musical pattern that none of the others recognized. The alien's eyes widened, and he whispered to the robot, asking what language that was, but the robot replied that no known database matched the sounds, and that it might not be a language at all, but a tone designed to mimic or influence predator behavior. The predator's ears twitched, and its head tilted slightly to one side. Then it gave a low rumbling growl that was not the sharp sound of aggression, but something deeper, almost questioning. Eli reached into the pouch at his belt and drew out a strip of dried meat, holding it out at arm's length. Without moving his feet, the smell drifted in the thick air, and the predator's nostrils flared as it stepped closer, until it was close enough for the alien to see the faint scars across its muzzle. For a long moment the predator stared at Eli. Then, in one smooth motion, it took the meat between its teeth, without touching his hand, and chewed slowly, its gaze never leaving his face. The alien muttered that this was madness, but Eli finally turned his head slightly and said in a calm voice that sometimes the jungle respected strength, but other times it respected patience and knowing when not to strike. The predator circled once, then sat back on its haunches, its tail curling around its paws, as if claiming the clearing as its own, and the crew moved to rest, but they did not take their eyes off the animal. Through the night, the predator remained near, sometimes vanishing into the mist for minutes, before returning, with its fur damp from some unseen hunt, and when it lay down again, Eli would glance at it, as if they shared some unspoken agreement. The alien asked quietly if the predator was going to protect them now, and Eli shrugged, saying nothing in this place truly protected you, it only decided you were not worth killing yet. The robot gave a soft alert that movement was building in the surrounding jungle, dozens of smaller shapes, weaving between the trees, coming closer with each moment, and Eli rose to his feet, his hand already reaching for the machete. The first of the shapes appeared at the edge of the clearing, tall and thin, with limbs that bent the wrong way, and heads shaped like smooth bone, the clicking of their jaws filling the air until it sounded like a swarm of cracking shells. The predator beside Eli rose, as well, its fur bristling, and its lips curling back from long, sharp teeth, a deep growl building in its chest that rolled out across the ground like thunder. The rust-colored alien fired first, hitting one of the spindly hunters and sending it spinning into the grass, but more poured from the shadows, their movements quick and jerky as they fanned out in a wide arc. Eli moved with the predator as though they had fought together, before his machete flashing in tight arcs that cut into the nearest hunters, while the predator lunged and snapped bones with the force of its jaws. The hunters screamed in high, sharp bursts, each sound answered by another from deeper in the jungle, and soon the clearing was a chaos of snapping teeth, swinging blades, and the stench of hot blood on the air. The robot fired steady pulses into the mass of attackers, while the alien reloaded as fast as his claws could move, and Eli's breath came in sharp bursts, but his eyes never left the rhythm of the predator beside him. One by one the hunters fell or fled into the mist, leaving behind twisted bodies and the sharp smell of their blood, and the predator stood over one of them, its chest heaving as it tore a strip of flesh free with a single jerk of its head. Eli wiped his blade on the grass and knelt by another hunter, cutting away the meat. With calm, precise strokes the alien stared in disbelief, asking if he was serious about eating them, and Eli replied that hunger cared nothing for disgust, and that they would need the strength for whatever came next. The alien turned away, but when Eli tossed him a strip of meat, he caught it without thinking, and though he did not eat right away, he kept it in his pack. They ate in silence, broken only by the sound of the predator gnawing bones and the faint drip of blood onto the ground, and though the air was thick with death, the jungle slowly began to make noise again, insects chirping and distant howls answering one another. The robot began repairs on its damaged leg servos, while Eli cleaned the machete, and the alien kept glancing at the predator as if expecting it to attack, now that the fight was over, but the animal only lay down again watching the mist. Eli looked toward the dark tree line where the last of the hunters had fled, and said that something bigger would come now, because in Deathworld jungle nothing ignored the smell of a fresh kill for long. The alien asked what could be bigger than the predator they had just fought beside, and Eli's expression tightened as he said the ones that even predators feared were the real rulers of this place. As if in answer, the ground gave a faint tremor under their feet, and far away a deep roar rolled through the mist so powerful that even the predator beside them froze, its ears flat against its skull and its tail low. The alien whispered that they should run, but Eli shook his head, saying that running without a plan was just choosing the way you would die, and that the only path was to find ground where the bigger thing could not reach them. The tremor came again, stronger this time, and leaves fell from the canopy as a massive shadow began to move between the far trees, its shape too large to see clearly, but the sound of each step heavy enough to make the clearing vibrate. The predator rose again, its muscles tensed, and its eyes fixed on the approaching shape, and for the first time Eli saw something like fear in those golden eyes. The alien's hand shook as he reloaded the blaster, and the robot's sensors spiked in alarm, giving a steady tone that did not stop. Eli took a step toward the edge of the clearing, his eyes narrowing as the first pieces of the shape came into view between the trees, dark plates of armor like rock and claws that left deep scars in the soil with every step. The air felt heavier, now the mist curling tighter around them, and the roar came again, closer and louder, rattling in their bones as the thing pushed forward through the jungle, leaving shattered trees in its wake. The predator beside Eli gave a single low growl, almost like a warning, and Eli gripped the machete tighter, his voice calm, but his eyes sharp as he told the others that this was the moment to decide whether they wanted to live or be part of the soil here forever. The shadow broke the last of the trees, and the full shape of the Alpha stepped into the clearing, its head lowering, and its eyes locking on them with the focus of something that had already chosen its prey. The morning in the Deathworld jungle was not gentle. It came with a cry of creatures that no human had ever named, and the smell of wet earth heavy with the weight of last night's storm. The human named Cain woke to the sound of something large moving beyond the wall of vines. His eyes opened slowly, every muscle in his body tense, because in this place nothing moved without reason, and every reason could kill you. He rose from the bed of leaves he had made inside a hollow tree, his fingers closing around the crude spear he had shaped from a shard of metal and the bone of some beast he had not dared to identify. He glanced to the side and saw the tiger lying with its head on its paws, amber eyes half closed, but ears flicking at the sound outside. Cain whispered to it, as if the beast would understand, "Keep watch and be ready, because today feels wrong." He stepped into the dim green light. Beyond the hollow, the jungle was alive in ways it should not have been so early. Massive leaves trembled, though no wind touched them. Shadows moved high in the canopy, as if something large but silent leapt from branch to branch. Cain moved slow, each step measured the vines underfoot, wet and slick. His mind replayed the past days, the strange pattern of events, the traps that had been triggered in the night, the scent of smoke drifting when no fire was made, and he began to think maybe the jungle itself was not his only enemy. Maybe something else had arrived here, something that could think and plan like he could. The sound came again, this time to his left, a deep dragging noise, like something heavy being pulled across the ground. Cain tightened his grip on the spear and crouched low. The tiger was beside him, now silent and dangerous, eyes fixed in the same direction. They moved together, shadows among shadows, until they reached a break in the vines and saw a scene that made Cain's blood run cold. A body lay there, not human, but one of the alien expedition team who had vanished days ago. Its skin pale, its chest torn open, but not eaten. It looked as if something had studied it, not hunted it. The body was marked with strange cuts and perfect patterns, lines that no wild beast could make, and Cain felt a cold certainty someone or something was watching him now. The tiger growled low. Cain scanned the trees, his senses screaming to move, but his curiosity pulled harder. He studied the cuts again and saw they were too clean, almost surgical. The memory of old stories about this planet came back, whispers in spaceports of predators that did not eat for food, But for knowledge, Cain did not want to believe them, until now a branch snapped high above. He looked up, and saw only a flicker of movement like a shadow, pulling back into the leaves too fast to follow, and then silence, as if the jungle itself held its breath. He pulled away from the body, moving quickly, now his heart beating hard, because he understood the rules had changed. The jungle beasts had always been dangerous, but they had no strategy. This was different. This was a hunter who could think, who could stalk and set traps like him, and that made it worse than anything he had faced before. He reached his hollow tree and began to pack what little he had: dried meat from yesterday, a water skin, the sharpened bone. Knife he kept at his waist. He had to move now before the shadow came again. The tiger followed without question, its muscles rippling under its striped coat. As they slipped deeper into the heart of the jungle, Cain chose paths where the ground was soft enough to hide their tracks, but still he felt eyes on his back, as if every step was marked. Every breath counted. The air grew heavier, the light dimmer, even though the sun was climbing above the canopy. He heard a cry far behind them, high and sharp, not from any beast. He knew it was a signal. He felt it in his bones. Someone was calling to others. They reached a ridge where the trees thinned the ground, falling away into a deep valley below. Cain crouched, scanning for a path, when he saw movement far ahead at the valley floor, a shape tall and thin, walking upright, its skin a deep green that blended with the leaves. It carried something in its hand, something that glinted in the faint light, and he knew it was not of this world. Another figure stepped out beside it, then a third, and a fourth, all moving with a strange, slow rhythm, like they had no fear. Here Cain pulled back before they could look up, his mind racing. The alien team had not been killed by the jungle. They had been hunted by these things. He knew he could not fight them, not now, not like this. But he also knew running forever was not an option. They would track him until he was too tired to fight. He had to think like them, set his own trap. But for that he would need the land, the rivers, the cliff edges, the dangerous plants, and the things that hunted in the dark. He moved away from the ridge, his mind shaping a plan. With every step the tiger beside him seemed to sense it, its ears forward as if ready for a chase. The day wore on, the air turning thick with heat, every sound louder than it should be. Cain stopped only to drink once from a narrow stream, careful to leave no trace. They crossed a patch of ground where the trees twisted into shapes that blocked the sky, their roots curling like the claws of some giant beast, and Cain marked it in his mind. This could be a place for an ambush if he dared to return. The tiger sniffed the air and growled low. Cain followed its gaze and saw fresh tracks, deep and clear in the mud, not from the tiger and not from any jungle beast. They were long, with 3 forward claws, and one behind each step, spaced perfectly, as if the walker measured them the same way every time. Cain felt the hair on his neck rise. These hunters were not just tracking him, they were herding him, driving him somewhere, and the thought made his chest tighten. He could almost feel their presence just beyond the trees. Every sound now seemed like a footstep, every rustle a hand on a branch. He moved faster, forcing the tiger to keep up until the trees broke into a clearing, and he stopped cold. The ground ahead was covered in sharp stakes, buried point up, each one coated in something dark and sticky that smelled of rot. This was not the jungle's work. This was a warning or a trap, and either way it was meant for him. He looked at the tiger. The beast looked back, silent. They turned as one, slipping into the trees again. But Cain knew now there would be no safe place to sleep, not tonight, and maybe not ever, because whatever hunted here was not going to stop until one of them was gone, and Cain was not ready to be the one who vanished. The morning came with a heavy mist over the jungle, and the air was cool but full of strange sounds that echoed far away, making it hard to know where they came from. And the human moved slowly through the thick green walls of leaves and vines, with the tiger walking ahead, sniffing the ground as if it could smell danger before it came close. And the ground was soft with wet soil that made every step sink a little, while the air smelled of rain and old plants and something else that was not pleasant, like the smell of something dead hidden somewhere nearby. And the human kept his spear close and his eyes moving, because he had learned that in this death world the moment you thought you were safe was the moment you were not. They moved toward a hill, because from there they could see far and maybe find the path back to the drop site. But every sound in the jungle made the human stop and listen, and the tiger would freeze with ears pointed forward and tail low, ready to attack or run if needed. And sometimes they heard the sound of big wings above, but the mist was too thick to see what was flying there, and the human wondered if those were the same creatures that had taken 2 of his team the first day they landed. And he could feel the weight of that memory, like a heavy stone in his chest. When they reached the top of the hill, the mist started to clear, and what he saw made him stop breathing for a moment, because below the hill was a wide open space in the jungle where the trees were broken and burned as if something huge had crashed there, and in the middle of that space was a metal structure half buried in the mud and vines, and he realized it was a part of their original drop ship, maybe torn off when they were hit and forced down, and if it still had the supply crate inside it, could mean food, water, tools, even a beacon to call for pickup, and the thought of it sent a rush of hope through his mind. The tiger growled low, and the human knew why, because even from here he could see movement around the wreck, shapes crawling and walking in strange ways, their limbs too long and their heads turning too fast to be human, and their skin looked wet and pale, almost glowing in the thin sunlight that came through the mist, and the human counted at least 7 of them moving in circles around the wreck like they were guarding it, and sometimes they stopped and tilted their heads like they could hear something too far for normal ears, and the human understood that getting to the wreck would not be simple. They stayed hidden under the leaves for a while watching the creatures, and the human began to notice something even worse, because every few minutes one of the creatures would stop and crouch, and from the ground something small would rise, like a plant growing too fast, and then the creature would eat it in slow bites. And it was not a plant, it was something alive and moving, and the sight made his skin cold, because it meant this place fed them, and they were not going to leave the wreck anytime soon. The human knew they had 2 choices. They could walk away and lose the chance of supplies, or they could take the risk and try to get inside. And he looked at the tiger, who was staring at the wreck with eyes that were not afraid, only focused and ready, and he thought of how far they had come through this cursed place, and how much they had survived, and he decided they would try. They moved down the hill slowly, using the thick plants as cover, and the human made sure his steps were soft even on the wet ground, and every time a creature stopped and turned its head they froze, until it moved again, and the tiger stayed close, its body low and muscles tight, ready to spring. And when they reached the edge of the open space, the human could see the wreck better. The metal was torn and black with burns, and part of it was sunk into the mud, but the hatch looked almost intact and maybe could be opened if he reached it without being seen. He waited for the moment when 2 of the creatures moved to the far side, and another bent down to feed, and then he ran low across the mud, the tiger running beside him, so silent it was like a shadow, and they reached the side of the wreck without a sound, and pressed themselves against the cold metal, the human's heart beating hard in his chest, and he could hear the soft scratching sounds of the creatures moving nearby, but not yet alarmed. He found the hatch and pulled, but it was stuck, and the noise it made was louder than he liked, and he froze, but the jungle sound stayed the same, and no alarm came, so he pulled again, this time harder, and with a sudden groan the hatch opened enough for them to slip inside, and the smell of old air and burned metal hit him, and inside the wreck it was dark, but he could see the supply crate still strapped to the floor, and it looked untouched, which was a miracle in this place. He moved to the crate and opened it, and inside were packets of dried food, bottles of water, a small med kit, and best of all, a compact beacon with a battery still sealed, and that meant they could send a signal, and maybe someone would hear it if they were lucky, and not already written off as lost, and the human felt a rush of relief, so strong it almost made him weak. But he knew they were not safe yet, because the creatures were still outside, and the only way back was through them. The tiger moved to the hatch and looked out, and then gave a low growl that made the human turn fast, and he saw why, because 2 of the creatures were now walking toward the wreck slowly, heads turning like they could sense something different, and the human closed the crate and strapped it to his back and gripped his spear tight, because the only choice now was to fight or be trapped inside. The sound of the first creature's steps in the mud grew louder, and the human felt the air grow colder, as if the jungle itself was holding its breath, and he stood ready. The tiger crouched low beside him, muscles tense, eyes fixed, and the mist began to close in again, making the shapes outside blur and twist, and the human knew the next few moments would decide if they lived to see another sunrise in this world. The first light of the alien dawn fell across the jungle floor, turning the mist into a pale golden sea, and Daniel opened his eyes slowly, feeling the weight of exhaustion in every muscle and bone, but he also felt the strange stillness around him. No screams of the night creatures, no rustle of predators, only the slow, deep breathing of the tiger curled beside him, its orange fur glowing faintly in the dawn light. He pushed himself up using his spear as a crutch and looked at the clearing where the Remains of their small fire smoldered faintly in the damp air. The tiger lifted its head and watched him with a slow blink that carried no threat, only recognition, and Daniel felt an odd bond had formed between them in the chaos of the Deathworld jungle. He looked toward the distant hills, where the extraction point lay still many kilometers away, and he knew this would be the last and most dangerous part of the journey. The other crew members were gone, taken by the jungle one by one, and now it was just him and this predator that should have been his enemy, yet had become his silent shadow. The tiger stood and stretched its powerful body, moving to his side, without hesitation, as if ready to follow him wherever he went. They began walking through the thick vines and twisted roots, Daniel cutting a path slowly, with his blade, the tiger moving silently behind him, sometimes darting ahead to sniff the air, then returning to his side. Like a guardian, the jungle was quieter than before, but Daniel knew this did not mean safety. It meant the predators were watching, waiting for the moment to strike. He tightened his grip on the spear and kept his senses sharp. After an hour of pushing forward, they came to a deep ravine, with black water flowing at the bottom and strange pale shapes moving beneath the surface. Daniel studied the only crossing, a narrow fallen log slick with moss and tilted at a dangerous angle. The tiger paced near the edge, sniffing and watching the shadows in the water. Daniel knew they could not swim across, not with those shapes waiting below. So he tested the log, carefully feeling it shift slightly under his weight. But hold, he began moving across slowly, one foot in front of the other. The tiger, following with silent grace, halfway across, a shadow surged from the water, and a long serpentine neck shot upward, jaws snapping at the air. Daniel lunged forward, nearly losing his balance, but the tiger leapt past him with a roar, landing on the creature's head and raking it with claws. The beast shrieked and vanished into the depths, allowing them to reach the far side safely. Breathing hard, Daniel looked at the tiger, and for a moment they simply stared at each other. No words, no understanding of species, only the shared knowledge of survival. Then they moved on into the dense green ahead. By midday, the sky had darkened with thick clouds, and a low rumble rolled across the jungle floor. Daniel knew a storm was coming, but it felt wrong, too fast, too heavy. The air was thick and hard to breathe. The tiger's ears twitched, constantly picking up sounds Daniel could not hear, and soon he saw why. In the shadows ahead, dozens of eyes glowed faintly, and the shapes of lean reptilian hunters emerged, their bodies low, their movements silent. Daniel raised his spear, and the tiger stood beside him, tail lashing, both ready for the fight. The hunters moved in a slow circle, their leader a massive scaled beast with a jagged crest on its skull stepping forward. Daniel could see the old scars across its body, marks of many battles. It hissed, and the others surged forward. Daniel thrust his spear into the first that leapt, and the tiger slammed into another. The fight became a blur of teeth and claws, and the metallic taste of blood in the air. Daniel moved like he had never moved before, every strike powered by the knowledge that stopping meant death. The tiger fought with savage power, its roars echoing across the trees, until finally the last of the hunters fled into the shadows, leaving the ground littered with their dead. Daniel knelt, breathing hard, his arm trembling as he gripped the spear. The tiger limped slightly, but was still strong, and Daniel reached out to touch its shoulder. The great beast did not pull away. They pressed on as the storm broke, heavy rain falling in sheets, turning the jungle floor into mud and sending rivers of water rushing through the roots. Daniel pushed through, knowing they were close at last, and then through the mist and rain he saw it, the faint metallic gleam of the extraction beacon high on a rocky rise. He began climbing the wet stone, the tiger scrambling beside him, until they stood at the top, looking at the blinking light that meant rescue. For a moment Daniel simply stood there, the rain washing over him, the wind whipping at his clothes, the tiger beside him like a statue. He knew that once the shuttle arrived, the tiger could not leave this death world. It would remain here, the master of this jungle, and he would return to the safety of space. But something inside him felt heavy at the thought. The distant roar of engines came through the storm, and Daniel waved to the sky, the shuttle breaking through the clouds and descending with its searchlights, sweeping the jungle floor. He felt the tiger step closer, its shoulder brushing against him, and he looked into its eyes, a silent farewell. When the shuttle landed, the crew inside stared in shock at him, alive against all odds and carrying more than he should have, supplies, food, and the story of how a human and a predator had walked through the worst the jungle could throw at them together. As he stepped aboard, he looked back one last time and saw the tiger watching from the ridge, rain pouring over its fur. Then it turned and melted into the green shadows. The shuttle lifted, leaving the Deathworld behind, but Daniel knew a part of him was still there, walking beside a silent guardian in a place where survival was never promised and bonds were forged in the heart of danger.